Good morning and welcome to the Core Connection. I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network. And today's topic is projection. We've all heard the saying, seeing is believing, but I think it's also important to recognize that we see what we believe. In other words, our beliefs impact what we can perceive. And so we're going to talk about that phenomena today and how we create our reality. So before we get started, let's take a minute or two to get present. Let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells, all your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale, exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant, bright light lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, and energizing all your molecules, all your electrons, creating a brilliant beam of light and energy from your heart out into the world. And as you exhale, exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's press our palms together. Vigorously rub your hands together to feel the friction, the temperature, the pressure, the motion, the tickling and tingling as you stop. And allow all those sensations to bring you present right here, right now, into this remarkable physical form that enables us to experience life. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So good to be here with you this morning. And we are talking about projection. And what I mean by projection is how we project our perception out into the world. And it then dictates our experience of the world. And in fact, dictates what we can see and perceive in the world. Good morning, Rosalind. Welcome. So good to have you joining us this morning. We are just getting rolling in a conversation about projection. So this is coming up because it's a variation on the conversation that we have pretty perpetually about how our stories create our reality. But what we're going to delve into is how our stories and our beingness actually dictates the reality that we perceive. So I was talking to someone yesterday who is doing really remarkable work in the world and has actually survived horrible trauma growing up, in a communist culture that was under siege, was abandoned by their parents, and among all kinds of other trauma, and was left to fend for themselves. And it left an imprint. It left a wound, a deep impact. And this person is now engaging in a project that has global implications, and their experience of the past 7 years that they have worked on this project is that they've been doing it alone. Now, they have successfully enlisted a team of people that have made contributions, varying degrees of contributions. But it's really, really interesting because the foundational story, of which I believe they were unaware, even though it's repeated often. And the reason I'm saying this is because I think we all have these stories and we don't even recognize that they're stories because they're our reality. So this person's reality was that they were alone and they really couldn't count on anybody. And this was something that they learned as a child, is that they needed, or the decision that they made as a child, given their circumstances, which were really traumatic, and they needed to survive. So what they discovered as a child is that in order to survive, they had to rely on themselves and that other people couldn't be trusted. And they also would be abandoned by other people. So this is a scenario that has played out over and over and over and over in life. And where we can each find evidence of these patterns or of these lenses, of these internalized beliefs, of these deep beliefs about the way the world is or who we are. One of the ways that we can recognize these deeply entrenched notions is to look at the patterns that recur in our lives. So, for instance, if you find that you find yourself involved in relationships where your partner is unfaithful, or you find yourself in relationships where your partner is abusive or has an issue with addiction, or I'm talking about negative patterns clearly here. But for those examples, there is something that is perpetuating that pattern. And I don't know about you, but I've seen patterns in my life where even though I saw the pattern, it kept repeating. And I felt very much at the effect of it. And that's because these patterns are not just encoded in our thought, but they're kind of encoded in our being. And how that happens is when we're young, we are indoctrinated either through circumstance or through messaging. And that indoctrination is invisible to us because we don't distinguish it as indoctrination. We recognize it as reality. This is how it is. And oftentimes when we experience trauma as little kids, our perspective is limited. So there may have been a righteous choice to a righteous decision to take certain action that gets interpreted by the child, for instance, as abandonment, or interpreted by the child or internalized by the child as I'm not good enough, for example, or I'm not worthy, or I people abandon me, or whatever it is, that this messaging, it gets internalized, and that becomes the baseline from which being then emerges. So who I'm being is abandoned. Who I'm being is not good enough. And so from the lens of that space, from the lens of being not good enough or being abandoned, what is going to happen is that I am going to act as if that's what's happening, or act in fear of that happening, which often creates the very thing that we're trying to avoid, a self-fulfilling prophecy. So if I'm afraid of being abandoned, I may be unavailable, or I may reach in and then pull back, or I may be very needy and then very standoffish, trying to protect myself from being abandoned, right? Which is creating abandonment in many, many situations. That's how it works. So the thing that we're talking about is it's like a radio station where we're tuned to a certain frequency. And in that frequency, we can only hear the music that's playing on that station. And this programming goes so deep that we don't even recognize that it's there. And so to further look at this idea of projection is that we are projecting our perception on the world. The world exists on the projector that we project. So there's only certain stuff that can play on that projector based on what we're projecting. And as we put out into the world, it's like putting out a request into the world for that frequency, if we're talking about radio stations, for that frequency of messaging. And so what needs to be shifted is that frequency. We need to be able to find a way to tune to a different station, to tune to a different frequency. And the first step in doing that is recognizing those patterns. And then doing things to dissolve those patterns. And the doing of the things to dissolve those patterns is the challenge. But in the work that I've developed with the core connection work, it's very clear that we need to do it in a multidimensional way. So it's not something that we just do through thought, but we need to connect with the body as well, and the emotions, because it's a complex, it's an interwoven, multidimensional, systemic frequency. And so we can't dissolve it just by understanding it. All that does is it gives us more reasons why we are the way we are. And when we start to recognize the pattern, one of the things that we can do is to presence ourselves to that idea. For instance, I don't belong. That was a big one for me, not belonging. And so what we can do is presence ourselves to that thought and the feeling, the emotion of that thought. And we can locate that thought and the emotion, particularly the emotion in our physical body, to say, okay, I'm feeling abandoned. Where in my body do I have that feeling? Where am I holding that emotion? And it's not unusual for people to be holding emotion in their gut, in their throat, in their heart, in their shoulders, in their back. Those are typical places that people will be holding emotion. And you could be holding it any place else, on your forehead or in your ear. I mean, it doesn't matter. It can be anywhere. But to notice what the sensation is as you presence yourself to that emotion. And what happens, interestingly, is as we are present to that emotion and allowing ourselves to experience it, oftentimes tears will emerge. And that's okay. That's energy. It's pent up energy that we've been compressing. And then you can look at, well, what's different about this notion of being abandoned? Do I feel as intensely about it? Is it still present? What's different? And that process can be repeated on different levels. And we can also do sort of an imaginal practice using our other than conscious along with these emotions to say, okay, well, if I have that emotion, if I'm feeling that emotion, the physical sensation in my belly, what would that sensation look like if it had an appearance? Or what would it sound like? And maybe it looks like a steamroller, for example. Well, you can picture the steamroller and allow your mind to go through a scenario with the steamroller and notice then what's different about the feeling in your belly. And then notice what's different about how you think about being abandoned. So notice that the language here isn't, I was abandoned. Just now, what I'm talking about being abandoned, like living into life as who I am is abandoned. In my case, it was not belonging, like I said. And what will happen is that our perception of circumstances will change. Even the perception or the experience of our own history will change. The intensity of the emotion will change. The sensation of the emotion will change. And what happens is that as we've tuned that frequency differently, different opportunities arise that were imperceptible previously. So someone who is abandoned and doing it all by themselves, there were people wanting to be engaged probably all along the way. But interestingly enough, after we did a session, this person who was doing it all by themselves, after 7 years, people started showing up and actually contributing in a measurable way. And it was so interesting because I was able to witness this person struggling to reconcile this deep notion that it was lifelong of who I am is abandoned and who I am is doing it alone in the world. Trying to reconcile the fact that all of a sudden people are showing up, quality people showing up and actually contributing, which created a cognitive dissonance because there's still a part that believed that they were doing it all alone. And there's an emergent part that recognizes that they're not doing it all alone. And there are people, like, they've shifted their frequency to be able to allow people to support them in a way that they couldn't before. So this is how we create our reality. And it's often pre-created for us by the things that we're programmed to, by the decisions that we make as little children. And then we have a 3-year-old or a 5-year-old or a 10-year-old driving the bus for the rest of our lives. And it's not that that child wasn't intelligent, but that child had a child's perspective. As we all do, we each have our own, even as an adult, we have our limited perspective. And we keep reinforcing that perspective. And we find all kinds of evidence that validates that perspective. It's not that our perspective isn't true, because we've created it to be true. But it's not true with a capital T. It's not reality with a capital R. What it is our subjective reality that we have validated throughout our lives and lived into the experience of that. So, as I was saying in the beginning, one of the ways that we can detect what we're projecting into the world is the patterns that we see over and over in our lives. And we can look at those patterns, and in deconstructing them, we then have an entree into dissolving those patterns and allowing our own authentic frequencies to emerge. And this isn't a once and done thing, believe me. It's an incremental thing that we do throughout our lives to open up new opportunity to become a more authentic expression of our essential being. That's what we're up to here. And that's why to be dissolving these patterns, lots of the patterns are culturally imposed. I was talking with somebody else the other day, and we were talking about all these patterns that we have culturally in relation to youth and age, and how it's age is something we want to avoid at all costs. You know, that the signs of aging are something to be depressed about, particularly for women. You know, the age and beauty, right? That even in our culture, men can get more handsome as they get older, whereas women don't. Now, I'm not saying that that's true. I'm saying that that's a general cultural bias, and there's a cultural bias against age, rather than cherishing of the wisdom of elders, rather than a recognition of the value of a lifetime of experience. And so that's something that we internalize to a great degree. And it's interesting about this whole thing regarding age. I remember knowing someone who at 42 was old. And I've heard people at 25 start talking about being old. And at my age, I hear a lot of people talking about being old. And my take on that is a perception. It's an internalized state where people get to a point where culturally, you know, we're retiring, and then we're in a different category, rather than, you know, for me, I feel like I'm just getting started. And I think that that's available to anybody at any time. Or we can feel old. There have been times when I felt like I was dying, you know, like my body was just deteriorating and breaking down, and my spirit was. And then we can reclaim life. It's all about what's going on in our beingness. So we can be old, we can be young, at heart at least. We can be abandoned. We can be connected. We can be bountiful. We can be love. So I invite you to look at what might you be projecting into your life? What are the patterns in your life that you can recognize? And what's at the root of that? What's the beingness that's at the root of that pattern? And then to start exploring it. So that's it for today. I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection, and I go live here each weekday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page and YouTube channel. And I invite you to please like, follow, and share Enlightened World Network and me. The links are in the description. And as always, it is such a joy for me, actually, and a privilege to have the opportunity to share these morning musings with you on what it is to be human. So until next time.